Hello and welcome back to the Swingman podcast. Now I know what you're probably going to say. Where the hell have you been? The playoffs started in the middle of April and now we're at the end of May and you've not posted one video about one game or one series. And there's no real way of explaining this, but the way I'm going to say it is life comes at you bloody fast. There's been a lot of things that have been happening over the past month and a half that I just was not ready for. And it hit me like a ton of bricks. So I thought I had to step away from the whole scene. And I know I could have made, 5, 10, 15, maybe even 20 videos on each game of each series of each conference. Like I fully understood I am missing out on a big sort of opportunity to make content, but the reality of the situation was I didn't really want to do it. But you're not here for all the mushy gushy emotional and personal reasons as to why I stepped away from podcasting for a little bit. That is for my other podcast. If you want to check that one out, I'll link that in the description. That's where I talk about all the personal stuff. But you're not here for that. You're here for basketball. So let's talk about basketball. Now, before we kick things off, I just kind of want to address how this episode is going to go, and probably the remainder of the playoff episodes are going to go. Recently, I've been watching a lot of NBA podcasts. If you guys are familiar with that, you'll know about channels like The Old Man and the Three with JJ Redick, which is brilliant, by the way, and The Draymond Green Show, which is my personal favorite. The reason why I'm saying this is I'm going to try and adopt Draymond Green's style of podcasting, which is most of the time talking to his audience without a co-host. And I've done it for the other personal podcast that I was talking about. So I just wanted to give it a shot on this podcast, and you guys can let me know sort of how it goes, whether you like it or not. We'll kind of get into that in the comments. So, as of when I'm recording this, last night, the Boston Celtics won against the Miami Heat. So I'm going to talk about not just that game, but I also wanted to cover the series as a whole. My thoughts and opinions on how it went and how it will sort of lead into the NBA Finals. I'll do the same with the Warriors and Mavericks series. And then sort of to round it off at the end, I'll kind of give my early predictions of how I think the series is going to go, as unbiased as possible, because if you guys have heard the previous podcast, you would know I'm a Warriors fan through and through. Now, I did start joining the Warriors hype in 2014, but cut me some slack, I was bloody 14, so I'm not a bandwagon fan. Shut your mouth. If you wanna talk about it, fight me in the comments, alright? But yeah, hopefully that sounds like a good episode plan to you guys. And without further ado, we're gonna start with the Boston Celtics closing out the Miami Heat whilst being on the road in a Game 7. What the heck happened there? I don't really know how to explain what happened last night to you guys, because typically it's very, very hard for an opposing team to come into an opponent's building and win a game. And I'm not even factoring in the home crowd. I think that's one of the most difficult things that non-sports fans would ever understand. Fans play sort of an intricate role in how players perform. So for me, it was very surprising watching the game, albeit it was very, very close, and seeing just how Boston kind of proved their maturity, if you want to call it that, when taking on Miami. But before we kind of get into sort of the nitty gritty of how the game went, just give a round of applause to Miami. Like, that was one of the more entertaining series that I've seen in this playoffs. Just strictly on sort of how down to the wire some games were, although there were some blowouts, but still, managing to stretch it 7 games, you couldn't really tell who wanted it more in that sense. Because over the course of the playoffs, we've seen games last about an average of 5 games in both conferences. I think that's fair to say. But with this series, I just felt like there was a different energy to it. I don't know if you guys are feeling that as well, but for me, like, I think the best way I can explain it is if a casual fan was to watch this series, they would think that they have some sort of rivalry against each other, because of how intense each team were playing on every single game, every single possession. It was just, all over the place. And I think a lot of people will note, no doubt, that these games were fairly low scoring games. And I think one of the main reasons for that is because both Boston and Miami have established their teams as defensive minded teams. So, I think the best way to kind of break this down is why the Heat lost and why the Celtics won. So we'll start off with why the Heat lost. To me personally, I don't think there was another outstanding player apart from arguably Bam Adebayo that really stepped up to it when it mattered the most. And I think more than anything, this series really showed how underrated Jimmy Butler really is. The reason why I say that is because recently on First Take, Stephen A. Smith called out Jimmy Butler for saying that he's sort of not recognized because he doesn't want to be recognized. And I guess his point was basically during the regular season, he doesn't really have outbreakish performances. But when it sort of comes down to the playoffs, that's when you start to notice him. And for the most part, I do agree with his take. But the only part that I sort of disagree with is just because he chooses not to perform as well as he does in the playoffs in the regular season does not mean that he's any less valuable of a player than anybody else, right? He'll show up when he needs to, and arguably when he has to. For me, the Miami Heat were a good enough team whether they were the first seed or the 5th or 6th to get to exactly where they are right now. So, apart from home court advantage, I don't really see a point in giving 100% of your energy through the first half of the season. And I know it's quite a weird thing to say because obviously you lose out on the entertainment factor when people just aren't bothered to perform. But for me, I'd rather see his energy going into something important, like the playoffs. As a Miami fan, I think I would try to understand that that's how it operates, because I'd want to see my star player out on the floor in crunch time when games matter, rather than Miami Heat versus Sacramento Kings and he goes off for 50. You know what I'm trying to say? Like, it just, yeah, it just doesn't make sense to me why athletes sort of need to perform 100% every single game, because that's taxing. That's taxing for anybody. And just because they're athletes doesn't mean that they can be treated like circus monkeys. But, that's a sort of different topic for a different day. I just think that there should sort of be more respect on Jimmy Butler for how he performs in the postseason, because that ultimately is where the NBA, I believe, would get most of their revenue. So why is that a complaint? I'm not really sure. Anyways, going back on topic, I think Jimmy Butler is an absolute superstar. He played outstanding for his team. And although he had some lackluster performances in games 3, 4, and 5, I think overall he was the only player to me that really showed that nitty-gritty dog-like personality to really just get the job done no matter what your overall box score might say. Like, if you just look at his overall numbers throughout this series, he had 41 in game 1, 29 in game 2, 47 in game 6, and 35, playing 48 minutes in game 7. Like, just sort of wrap your head around how amazing that is, It not a lot of guys have that kind of longevity at that age. So it's just, yeah, I'm singing my praises to Jimmy Butler here, as you can tell. But yeah, I wholeheartedly believe that Jimmy Butler is the face of this franchise and will continue to be the face of this franchise purely because he deserves it. So if I were the front office, I'm getting this man some help, because the one major takeaway that I saw when looking at the series as a whole was they do not have enough people to space the floor. And I think that really affects the Heat negatively, because at some point in the playoffs, teams are always going to strategize what's their main point of attack and how do we close that. And for Jimmy, who's not a really efficient shooter from behind the arc, he's going in for drives and mid-range pull-ups / fadeaways sometimes. But if you don't have guys who can space the floor, and I think you can see it if you watch the games back, a lot of them are paint scorers. And if your third option for outside scoring is PJ Tucker, right? Don't get me wrong, I love PJ Tucker. I love what he brings on the defensive side of the ball. But if you put him anywhere on the 3-point line that's not the baseline threes either side, he becomes obsolete. And his defender can just be the help defender on anybody who drives in that paint. So unless somebody like PJ Tucker improves his efficiency from outside of the arc and becomes less of a quote-unquote predictable offensive player, this team cannot go very far. And I understand Tyler Hero was dealing with some injuries, but let's even take somebody else on the Heat team. Max Strus. He was getting a lot of flack online for not performing. But I think Draymond Green put it best on his podcast. He gets paid, if Draymond was correct, around $2 million when, most NBA players are getting paid in the hundreds. So how can you ask somebody to perform that well when he's not really the superstar caliber player that's getting paid millions of dollars? He is a role player, and yes, he should have some breakout games, but you shouldn't expect maximum efficiency from a minimum wage player guy. So yeah, that was their major downfall. The 3-point shot just wasn't their friend. So I think it kind of emphasizes the importance of a player like Tyler Hero and Duncan Robinson. That's another player that I wanted to mention actually. Duncan Robinson is a phenomenal player, but for him to not play the majority of games and not get the usual minutes that he's used to within this series, I think he played the best he could with the opportunities that were given to him, which was very, very slim. So yeah, I just think that the Heat sort of missed out on an opportunity to use players like that in order to create more driving kicks, because I think Jimmy has enough gravity to pull a lot of players into the paint for him to just dish it out. But it would be stupid of me not to talk about, I think, the dumbest decision in the game, which was the Jimmy Butler 3-pointer with 18 seconds on the clock. What the heck was happening there? I think it was a completely stupid and impulsive move by Jimmy Butler to cement himself as the hero of Miami. That just wasn't a smart play, because they had the whole of the shot clock, meaning the whole of the last possession of Game 7 to make a better decision. And I just think they lost it. And for somebody like Jimmy Butler, who isn't shooting that well from behind the arc in his career at around 32%, I don't understand why on earth he would take that shot. But I don't think that decision or that performance should really discredit Miami for the team that they are. Because let's just face it, like, they went to the finals against LeBron James and Anthony Davis and managed to pull out 2 games against them when nobody was betting on them. And yeah, you could say the bubble was this kind of thing that they put under the rug, but yeah, it doesn't mean that they didn't get there in the first place. So moving on to why I think the Celtics won. I think over the course of the series, you really saw the importance that Marcus Smart brings to the overall morale of that team. When he got injured in Game 3, you could kind of see that the team was almost deflated when they were on the defensive side of the ball. I mean, luckily, they managed to win the game that he didn't play, but still, you could see that the lane was being opened up a lot easier because he wasn't there to provide that defensive presence that he usually brings. The second reason as to why I think the Boston Celtics won the overall series was Al Horford. Honest to God, yeah, when would you ever think people would say his name again? Apart from obviously devoted fans to the Boston Celtics who understand the role that he plays in that team. Apart from them, who would have mentioned his name? Because let's be clear, he's a 35-year-old man playing in the NBA. Like, you would have thought that that's it. Like, he should just hang up his jersey and, leave the game forever. But to me, he showed that age is just a number in this game. And the body doesn't really give up unless you give up. And the amount of blocks that he got in game 4, I think it was just incredible to watch, because you wouldn't think of him as the most nimble guy when guarding players who are obviously younger, faster, not stronger, but more athletic, I guess. And I know this is quite off topic, but the performance that he put on against the Bucks, and I think you guys will know which one I'm talking about, after he got dunked on by Giannis, started nodding his head, and then proceeded to smoke the Milwaukee Bucks. But yeah, back on topic, I just think that Al Horford is probably one of the most disrespected people, not only on that team, but in the NBA. Because although he won't provide some of the offensive numbers that obviously Jalen and Jason will give you, he's always there defensively. And like I said before, this team is a very, very defensively oriented team. So I think the major change that sort of happened with the Boston Celtics was when Marcus Smart was brave enough to not throw his teammates under the bus, but essentially call them out for ball hogging, really. But he basically put forward the idea that there needs to be more ball movement and trust within the team in order for them to win. And then after that, after the All-Star break especially, they just went on an absolute tear. So, for somebody who watches the game for ball movement and selfless basketball, I think that was quite a brave thing of Marcus to say. And I mean, as it turns out, it was the best thing that probably could have happened to this team. So kudos to Marcus Smart for being outspoken and changing the fate of the Celtics around, basically. And of course, we can't round off this series segment without talking about Eastern Conference Finals MVP Jason Tatum. I think in this series he averaged around 25 to 26 points a game. So he won it, and deservingly so. Because I feel like he is the motor for this team. I know I spoke a lot about the importance of Marcus Smart and the role that he plays within this team on defense. But on offense, it's really Jason Tatum. I mean, not only can he score, but he is a little bit of a playmaker himself. And like I said, I think Marcus Smart being open and honest about how selfish the team was really opened everybody's eyes to creating more efficient basketball through ball movement. Because whilst isolation superstars are fun to watch, it doesn't really affect the team in a positive way, because if you're not getting touches on the ball, you lose your momentum and essentially you start to go cold, which is what you saw with the Miami team and Max Strus. So I hope you guys are understanding my point of view and hopefully you think it's valid. But seeing as though we're sort of in the halfway segment of the episode, we're going to move straight on to the Western Conference, the Dallas and the Warriors series. Personally, as a Warriors fan, I would have preferred to see the Suns and the Warriors go at it, just from an entertainment factor. Not because I thought they were an easier matchup than the Mavericks, because that's just not true. I think that, the Phoenix Suns let that Game 7 slip, which ultimately led them to not appearing in the Western Conference Finals. And by the way, this is no disrespect to Dallas Mavericks. They are still a very efficient team. I just think that the Phoenix Suns were the team to beat, really. And to say that I was shocked that the Mavericks were able to win the series being down 2-0 is an understatement. But yeah, it just kind of proves what kind of team the Dallas Mavericks are. So transitioning into that, I'm going to talk about the Dallas Mavericks. Luka freaking Doncic. That's it. No, I'm just playing. But seriously, Luka was an absolute performer throughout the series. And it was even evident in the Sun series because if he hadn't stepped up, I doubt the Mavericks would have made it past 6 games. So yeah, he is a bona fide superstar at this young of an age, as hard as it is to believe. But it's all one of the apparent flaws that I see within the Mavericks offense is just the pace. I think it's way too slow for the modern NBA. And even the announcers were talking about, I can't remember who, but they were right, you know? It gives teams a lot of time to really set up their defenses and know what they're doing rather than scrambling. And I think that's what you saw in the Warriors series. Because if Luka brought that ball up, the Warriors were able to react accordingly by putting Andrew Wiggins on him as his primary defender, as opposed to if he brought the ball up quicker, it would create more scrambled defense to where you could create mismatches, whether that's a big on a guard or Doncic on a big. The second problem that I see with the Dallas Mavericks is just not enough firepower. When my co-host and I spoke about super teams and what it takes to create one, and overall how many people you really need to be effective in winning in this league, I just don't think Luka Doncic has another star beside him that he can rely on so that he doesn't have to carry as much load on his shoulders that you saw him do in this series. Like, let's take that game 3 for example, where the Warriors eventually went up 3-0. How can you allow star players on your team? I'm saying star with a grain of salt because that's how many stars Dallas really have. Reggie Bullock, Maxi Kleber, to go a combined 0 of 15 from the field in game 3. How can you let that happen? You're being paid too much money to not perform. However, they did bounce back in game 4, obviously, when they needed to win the most. They did bounce back, but in my humble opinion, I don't think that team had enough of a fighter's mentality to really get through Golden State. And you know what? Now that I kind of think about it, it makes sense. Because Dallas has never gotten past the first round, I think, ever since Doncic has joined. So this is the furthest they've ever come. So with that being said, round of applause for him. I think I can cut them a little bit of slack, because that just really comes down to inexperience and how seasoned you are. And for your main superstar to only be 22, it's a lot to ask from a young team. So with that being said, I think their future is super, super bright. But this team just has to put more emphasis on clutch time situations and how you deal with pressure against seasoned and more experienced playoff contending teams, especially a group like the Warriors who have won multiple championships. But moving on to why I feel like the Warriors won that series was, let's point out the obvious, as I just said, they are the more experienced team. They know how to handle these kind of situations because they've been there before. But I think the most outstanding thing was their defense. Granted, Luka Doncic absolutely smoked them despite them throwing zones and even box and ones at Luka to try and get other people involved. Luka still got his own. So despite everything that Golden State was throwing at Luka, he still managed to score 20 in Game 1, 42 in Game 2, 40 in Game 3, 30 in Game 4, and 28 in Game 5. So it just goes to show you that, like, the NBA is in a really good place once our current superstars eventually call it quits and leave the league. Now, the main question is, if the players had shown up for Dallas, would this series have gone a different way? In my opinion, no. I think it would have stretched out to 6 games, but ultimately, the Warriors just proved too experienced for a young Dallas team. They are fighters, but to put all that load on one man's shoulders it's a bit too much to ask of anybody, really. So, hopefully the Mavericks sort it out and we continue to see them in the coming years. Now, we're going to move on to the Western Conference most valuable player, Stephen Curry. I don't think that was the right decision. I think the league focuses way too much on offensive productivity and not enough on who is guarding the main star. So with that being said, I feel like Andrew Wiggins should have won Western Conference Finals MVP simply because of the magnificent defense he was able to play on Luka, despite, as I just said, his numbers. I think what the Warriors really understood was that Luka Doncic was going to score regardless. It was just about how hard are you going to make it on him to score. And I think in Game 7, when he played the majority of the third and fourth quarter, I think if not both of those quarters actually, you could really see that it was taking not only a physical but a mental toll on carrying that team. And you saw that when he started missing his shots and missing his layups, you could see the frustration on his face. And, I mean, if you haven't already seen the video, he kicked the chair over after smoking a layup. And I understand that's just the competitive nature within him. But a part of me would have felt like I only had to take that layup because I didn't have any other options offensively. It sounds very disrespectful to the Dallas Mavericks, but that's just how I felt like the series went for Luka in particular. So that's why I felt like defense should have been the main priority when thinking about who the Western Conference Finals MVP was going to be. Because let's take it back to their first finals run. Andre Iguodala won the MVP for guarding LeBron James. And I think that was the right decision. It was the most deserving decision because it was the hardest task to do. So when you look at it from that perspective, guarding Luka was the hardest task to do. And he stepped up to it. Now, admittedly, I was not the biggest fan of Andrew Wiggins and the whole trade because of his reputation of being one of the NBA's biggest busts. And for a large part of his career, he was a bust because he was the primary option on offense. So that's what I thought of him when he came to join the team. But as soon as he started incorporating the Warriors' style of play to the point where he didn't have to become the primary scorer, you saw him flourish in his role. And I think he's made tremendous leaps and bounds to his overall career and his overall legacy as a Warrior. So I say all that to say, Mr. Andrew Wiggins, I was wrong about you. Pay this man when it's time to pay him. So, moving on to the final segment of this episode, my early finals predictions. Now, what do you guys think I'm going to say? Celtics? Hell no. Warriors in 6. That's my prediction. Why? Again, I think it's for the same reason that the Warriors beat the Mavericks. Not to say that the Mavericks and the Celtics are on the same level, because they're not. They're really not. But I just think that they are a proven team. And yes, I am acknowledging that they did go to the Eastern Conference Finals against LeBron James and the Cavaliers way back when, and they didn't even have Kyrie on their team at the time, which is insane to think about. But I just think that when the lights get the brightest, the Warriors will show up. My only concern is in the finals, Steph Curry is not the performer that you are used to seeing on a regular basis. And that's not just me saying it, because why would I discredit my own star player? That is strictly down to statistics. Yes, he can get his numbers, but his efficiency rating is not that high. And I think in these times, he can get a little bit careless. We all know about that crucial turnover he made in Game 7 when he tried to throw the behind the back to Klay Thompson, and it completely went off. You can tell that I'm sad talking about this. And the shot that Kyrie Irving made over him, yes, I remember that. I still cry about it in my sleep. But yeah, Steph's defense is probably one of the more concerning aspects of his game. But in saying that, he has made a significant improvement to how he's able to stick to his man and not necessarily get bullied around so much like you saw in his earlier career. I mean, he is still kind of begging for switches, but I think if he was to be put in that situation again where they force a switch on him, hopefully he doesn't back down so easy, because he's a lot stronger than he used to be. So I hope that he depends on his defensive ability a lot more in this series, because with the way the Celtics are playing, we're definitely going to need it. You're probably thinking as well, if I have so much faith in the Warriors, why am I not saying 5 games? Because I think the thing is, when you're being beaten and you're facing elimination, you are always bound to win that elimination game. We saw it in the Boston Heat series, and we saw it in this series as well. Nobody likes facing elimination, so of course they're going to bring their A game to the table when it matters the most. And I think it would be downright disrespectful to say that we could easily handle the Celtics. That's just not possible. With the year that they're having, it's going to be an absolute dogfight. And it will probably be messy, box score-wise and percentage-wise. But it's going to be an entertaining series, no matter what. Now, flipping the script to why I think the Celtics have the best chance of winning against the Warriors as opposed to any other team is overall longevity. I know I said Al Horford is a 35-year-old man doing insane things, but let's talk about Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown and other young, capable role players like Grant Williams and Robert Williams. Like, that's the thing that sort of scares me the most when you talk about this upcoming series. It's just a matter of, can the Warriors handle Boston and their young, athletic core. Like, as much as I love the Warriors and I know that they are the more efficient basketball team, let's face the facts. Steph Curry is 34 years old. Klay and Draymond are 32. Andre Iguodala, he's practically decaying in front of our eyes. Like, this team is getting old. And as much as I hate to say it, there's not a lot of dynasty runs left in them simply because of age. So when I think about how much defensive pressure Steph is going to face coming off screens, getting bumped real hard in the paint, I think that's just going to be quite taxing and take a huge toll on his performance because he's having to work so hard just to get a shot off. Although he has kind of made a living off how well he moves off the ball. So I guess I just kind of have to wait and see how Boston takes on the defensive task of guarding Steph Curry. Let's not mention breakout stars, Mr. Poole Party Jordan Poole. My goodness gracious. I'm excited to see the Warriors' young core when everybody is healthy because he's such an entertaining player to watch, and you can kind of see the effect that being around two efficient three-point shooters has done to him. Because primarily I think I would regard him as a bit more of a slasher. The way he's able to handle the ball and eventually get to the rim and dunk the way he does actually is quite surprising for a small, quite skinny guard, really. But just watching him is really impressive because of how he's able to handle the pressure of big games and still perform. And just a side note, he definitely should have won Most Improved Player. That's not me being biased or anything. But like Draymond Green said, Ja Morant isn't the most improved player because he's been the most improved player for years now, if that's the criteria. He should have been in the MVP conversation, not the most improved conversation. That belongs to either Desmond Bane or Jordan Poole. Back on topic again. I just think Jordan Poole has really embraced his role within the Warriors. And as much as I hate, obviously, the tragic injury that happened to Klay Thompson, not only with his ACL in Game 6 of the 2019 finals, but then he tore his Achilles right when he was meant to come back. So he's been missing out on 2 prime years of his career. And as much as it's terrible news for Warriors fans, I think it was one of the best things to happen for the team. The reason being is because it allowed the young players to really gain those minutes that they wouldn't otherwise gain with Klay Thompson being out on the floor. Steph Curry needed a backcourt mate, Jordan Poole was there. So I feel like with all that playing time over the past 2 years, being able to really see how the NBA works was really beneficial for him. And I thought that when Klay came back, he was going to take a back seat. But he hasn't. Because if you saw the last 5 games of the season or so, Klay and Poole combined went absolutely ballistic. And that's with their new small lineup, a sort of equivalent to the lineup that they used to have back in 2014, 2015, except replace Harrison Barnes with Andrew Wiggins, and Thompson basically playing that small forward role that Iguodala used to play. They're just an exciting team to watch. And also another thing, as a Warriors fan, this year, this championship would probably mean the most to us than any other championship that the Warriors have ever won. And it's just because of Klay Thompson, honestly. For me personally, Klay Thompson is one of, if not my favourite player on the team, because he's not talked about in mainstream media enough as somebody like Steph and more recently Paul have been. If you've noticed the way that the media covers Warriors, it's always Steph, Paul, and then Klay. And I think that because of all the injuries he's sustained, that's why he's in that position where he's sort of overlooked. So as a fan, it's obviously going to be the most meaningful championship because 2 years ago, like everybody on the team has said, 2 years ago, the Warriors won 15 games. Granted, that was the 2020 bubble season, but we didn't even get a sniff of the playoffs, not even a play-in tournament spot. We were bottom of the league, rock bottom. And obviously in the following year, we just came up short. After Steph broke his hand, we lost to the Lakers, lost to the Grizzlies, and didn't make it into the 8th seed for the playoffs. So, to summarize, I think that the Warriors are going to take it in 6. And this is my final thought on why we're going to win it. You don't want to see Game 6 Klay, baby. We're coming. That's going to wrap up episode 4 of the Swingman podcast. Thank you so much for tuning into this episode. I know it was a bit of a long one, me just speaking by myself, but I've missed out on a lot of playoff content and I thought I should kind of update the channel a little bit. So, first and foremost, thank you guys for your patience. I am coming back. And with that being said, for the entirety of the finals run, I should have a video analysing every game of this series. So stay tuned, keep updated with my Instagram, because that's where I'll be posting the majority of the updates. But if you enjoyed the video, be sure to subscribe, click that like button, and also click the little bell icon to be notified about when every video gets released. Get your popcorn ready because it's going to be a good one, baby. Let's go. Take care and goodbye.